So in an effort to have you help us with the CFC donations to heal from the impact of the boarding schools, we want to tell you a very short story about these boarding schools. A long time ago, before the comings of the Lightskins, where we got our way of life from was from our Mother Earth. And what we found that there was a world you could see and a world you could not see. And that these two worlds were run by a set of principal laws and values, and that the spiritual laws and the physical laws, they were interconnected with each other. So this was the original source of the native culture. And that as we understood the cycle teachings, then what we also created was a community way of teaching. So at the root of our communities, you had the healing, the language, spirituality, elders teaching, ceremonies, etc. Then those little trees, what they represent is the children trees. So the knowledge that we had during this time, because we got the teachings from the earth, is we actually taught the young boys how to become men, and we taught the young girls how to become women. And so we had a way to teach the cycle of life. And of course, the women, we taught them how to become elders. The men, we taught them how to become elders. Then our elders played a very significant role in our communities. And so when there was any question about the teachings, about these laws, then it was the elders that we went to because they were the most knowledgeable because of their age, because of their experience. And so we always went to them, and they made sure this knowledge was available to everyone. So this was the original community that we had. During these days, we did not have problems with alcoholism. We didn't have problems with sexual abuse or with violence, domestic violence. We had a way of showing how to teach the cycle of life and how our camps or our villages lived in harmony. Then something happened to us. There's something that happened to us. It took us from this community. And so today, this is how the community looks that we work in today at White Bison. We have high alcoholism, sexual abuse, violence. We have relationship issues, codependency issues. How is it we went from what was originally to being in harmony to this community? Well, what a lot of people don't know is, in about 1879, the government funded a boarding school at Carlisle Indian School, it was called, in Pennsylvania. And what they did in this school is they set a strategy to assimilate the native children into the dominant culture. So the government funded the building of over 500 schools across the United States. And what happened at these schools today is something that we call historical trauma. What is historical trauma? Historical trauma is a combination of immense losses and traumatic events that are perpetrated upon an entire culture. In other words, the government-funded program, it was designed was to take away the culture, not keep it, take away the language, the land, take away the people due to disease and war, take away a way of life, religion, and to destroy the family structure. This program was actually funded by the United States government. So this is what we mean by the boarding school. In many cases, they were forced, but what happened is they went to the tribes across the United States and they started to take the children away from the parents. Some as young as 3 years old, all the way up. And what they did is they take them away from the camps, and what they would do is then what this did was to break the cycle. And what they said in the school system is, we're going to teach them our way of how you're supposed to grow up and how you're supposed to be. And so the children by the thousands were taken away from the villages across, and they were put into this boarding school system that was funded across the United States. And so what happened in these schools then was this, is these little children, instead of being taught the spirituality, the language, culture, what happened is they would not allow any healing. They were not allowed to learn the native spirituality, no ceremonies, They were punished if they spoke the language, no cultural values, and they took away the elders' teachings. And in their place in these schools, what happened, this is where the kids experienced severe beatings. They were punished if they spoke their language. There was no teachings. In these boarding schools, what you saw was high sexual abuse of the little children in these schools. They put soap in your mouth if you spoke the language. And no ceremonies, no culture, and they cut their hair and put them in uniforms. And so as these little children experienced this type of parenting, then naturally when they got out of the school they were going to come back home. But of course when they come back home, what happened, this is the first place that we started to see the introduction of alcoholism in the community. And because they were beat in the schools, then this is what we experienced when they came back home. They had the violence. This is where we started to experience the sexual abuse in our communities, because they were sexually abused as little children when they were in these schools. Today we refer to these as the boarding schools, the mission schools, or the residential schools. So as these little children came back and they grew up into, instead of being the elders, what happened is they didn't know the knowledge. So the traditional knowledge, it disappeared, and we're no longer able to teach the young ones what this way of life was that we had originally when we got our teachings from the earth. And so in this program, what it was actually called was called Kill the Indian, Save the Man. And so what happened then in our communities, we had the introduction of violence, the sexual abuse, we took away our ability to love, alcoholism, and what we need to realize, what White Bison is working today with, is the system is still there. So the little trees, they're just doing what the big trees do. And so what we start to see is that our kids are in a lot of issues. Of course, if we don't break that cycle, they're going to grow up and they're going to teach their children that way. Because today we have many of our Native youth, they're going into prisons. Many of our Native youth are ending up in treatment. Many of our Native youth are ending up in the prison system. And then too many of our youth, they're ending up in heaven, the teen suicides. I'll be visiting a community here shortly where they had 100 teenage suicide attempts in 6 months. And that's the severity of the issues that White Bison that we go work with, you see in the communities. So what we say about this is that this is being handed down generation to generation. It's something we call historical trauma, even to the descendants of the boarding schools. And so in order to break this cycle, we say, how do we do this? At one point we lived in harmony. So we know that we have to bring back the very thing that was taken away, and that's the spirituality, to bring back that culture. And how do we do this? What we do is by returning to the culture, the teachings, the principal laws, and the values of our ancestors. And so this is what we need to help with. We know how to break the cycle of historical trauma, and it is by implementing something called intergenerational healing. And what is that? It's a combination of immense healing, training, returning to the ceremony, spirituality, and to bring back that culture, to bring back the language, the land, the people's health, a way of life, the religion, and to rebuild the family structure. And this is what we need your help with. We want to take this community that looks like this, and we have the knowledge and the ability after 20 years of development, that's how long we've been at this, to take our communities from this to bring them to this. Now, how is it we do this? Is to restore our communities back to the knowledge that our ancestors had. That doesn't mean going back living in teepees. It means to go back and to think the way that we're supposed to think. So what we call this process is creating a healing forest. And so what we have the ability to do now is, for those who have problems with alcoholism, we made a program called the Medicine Wheel in 12 Steps. We have one for men. And as they get rid of the anger, guilt, shame, and fear, we teach them how to bring back the culture, ceremonies, spirituality, and how to bring back recovery. And we have programs now both for men, and we have programs also for our Native women that are in healing. This is the start of building a recovering community. And of course, because everything is interconnected, we have to take on the issues of the family and of the youth. And for that, we created a program called the 7 Trainings. So we go to a community and we conduct all 7 trainings simultaneously. Those who want to work for men, room 1, for the women, for the daughters of traditions, sons of traditions. So we go and we train grassroots community members on how to turn around and how to start these circles of recovery. And so it's really easy to see over a period of a couple of years, you start to see it's one person helping another person, helping them to recovery with various programs that we have created, you see, over the 20 years that we've been in existence. So it's about empowering the community. We call these people that we train, we call them coaches. And so they work one-on-one with small groups of people who come together to form these circles. As these circles grow, the circles will split, and then somebody from there, they will become a coach, and then they start their own circles. And so it's a grassroots movement of community healing, bringing back the values, bringing back the culture, the teachings, where each tribe can do it in their own way, and to bring back the family values. So as we work on these communities, our goal is to work towards restoring these communities back to the old way, back where we can again teach our children, to teach our girls, to teach our boys on how they're supposed to be. That we have the knowledge and we have the ability to bring this back, even though it's this year, 2010, we have the ability to do that. Of course, everyone knows it takes some funding to do this. Many of our tribes are at the poverty level. They're very, very poor. The demand for us to do this across the United States is very, very great. So we just hope that this understanding of the boarding school, that it will awaken something in your heart and that you will feel moved. We don't care how small the donation, how big the donation is. Because we're small, we have the ability to do a lot with a little. And so for those of you who feel moved to help our First Nations people, the first people that were here in the United States, we would really appreciate you. And if not, continue to watch the website. We are updating it constantly, and there's a lot of very positive healing going on in our communities. So we thank you for your support. So in an effort to have you help us with the CFC donations to heal from the impact of the boarding schools, we want to tell you a very short story about these boarding schools. A long time, and that as we understood the cycle teachings, then what we also created was a community way of teaching. So at the root of our communities, you had the healing, the language, spirituality, elders teaching, ceremonies, etc. Then those little trees, what they represent is the children trees. So the knowledge that we had during this time, because we got the teachings from the earth, these two worlds were run by a set of principal laws and values, in that the spiritual laws and the physical laws, they were interconnected with each other. So this was the original source of the native culture. Long ago, before the comings of the light-skins, where we got our way of life from was from our Mother Earth. And what we found, that there was a world you could see and a world you could not see. And that